Hi everybody, welcome back to Kosmos. So I thought I'd post a quick update on these oilers, very good quality oilers called Reilang. I've yet to figure out if they're made in Switzerland or Germany. I think they're probably a Swiss product, but this one says Swiss-made, and I recently spoke about some I'd bought. And they came from Germany, and in fact that one says Swiss-made also, but then this one says made in Germany, so I don't know. I think they're Swiss products, and they're a bit pricey for oilers, but they are really incredible quality. They're an absolute delight to use, and so I thought I'd just post a little update about how they work. So I've got this one filled with hydraulic oil or headstock oil, and one of the things about them is you can use them at any angle. So we have to charge it up a little bit. So that's on a side, and you can see how vigorously that squirts out. They will also work upside down, and there are a number of features about them that make them unique, and I'll demonstrate that on one of these other oilers. I'll just get rid of this little tin of oil. So this is an empty one. So first of all, what strikes you is the quality of the can. It's cast aluminium. So if we unscrew the body from the works, you can see it's a solid aluminium casting. It's not like a cheap steel pressing. So very, very good quality, pretty weighty thing. I think these are 200 milliliter. Oh look, they actually tell you the pressure, 25 bar. And then they've got an asterisk, I don't know why. So, actually it might be easy, I'll show you the bigger one, because it's easier to see, and it's got a few more little features. Right, so that's the bigger one. It's slightly uglier, in fact, with this fat base. But obviously that's to stop it tilting round. And so if we undo this, you can admire some of the Swiss and or German design and engineering that goes into something like this. First of all, you notice that the little tail of the oil pickup is free to swing around, and so no matter which orientation you hold the can in, or how little oil there is, that is always going to dip into the little puddle of oil in the can, and so you're never forced to hold the can at a certain angle to get that last bit of oil out. The can also works upside down, and I'll show how that works in a moment. The other thing that's great about it is it's got this little lip. So you see that the top of the top of the can has a little raised lip, and so invariably there'll be a little drip of oil left on the nose, and when that's left standing upright, it will slowly run down and find its way onto the top of the can. And in a normal oil can, and so in a normal or cheap oil can like this, the type you can kind of buy for a £5, there will also be a degree of dripping down, and you can see that this entire surface is covered in oil. There's an oily film all over the outside of this oil can, and I haven't particularly used it a lot or heavily. That's just the way, gravity works. And so if you look at some of the features, if you want, of this can, you'll immediately appreciate why the Reilang is so well thought out. For a start, the screw-on lid that contains the mechanism of this oil can fits over the outside of the can, right? And so if there's any dripping or any leakage from the can itself, it's guaranteed to drip and run down the outside. With a Reilang, the screw thread is within the body of the can, and there's a very chunky O-ring there. and so you're pretty much never going to get a leak out of that joint, provided, of course, you've snugged the screw down sufficiently tightly. The other thing is, when that little remnant droplet of oil, after you've given it a squirt, when that little remnant runs down, where does it find itself? Well, it finds itself on the upper surface of this lid, and then slowly makes its way around and down all over the surface of the can. The other thing is, I don't think these cans have a non-return valve. Oh, they do actually. Okay, so this does have some of the features, if you like, that the Reilang has, but not nearly as carefully designed or well thought out. And one of the things I love about this Reilang is the return. So we were talking about oil that drips down the outside of the spout and then pools in this little cup here. The kind of activating the activating rod that pulls the whole plunger arrangement up simply passes through a hole in the casting with no seal whatsoever, and so any oil that does pool here will eventually seep down and drip back into the oil can. This also has that, but it's just a token, because there's nothing to encourage the oil to get to that point. The oil would much rather spread all over the surface rather than necessarily congregate under that that little pin. And so I will briefly dismantle this so that you can admire the subtle features. So we've had a look at that little pickup spout. There's a non-return valve there, it's a little ball with a spring behind it. We can remove that, although there's not much to see at that point. Just using a Watchmaker screwdriver. As you can see, that's a little alloy casting, probably die cast, I should have thought. And there'll be a spring inside that body, and just to keep the little non-return ball valve closed, which means that there's generally always pressure available to you, and you don't need, loads and loads of cranking of the handle the first time you pick the oiler up. Okay. Oh yes, that's something else. So that element there is just a piece of brass pipe, and then it's got a turned piece. Can be sure this is a metric thread. It's got a little turn section that's pressed in there, so very, very well made indeed. You actually have turned components made in Europe. You're looking at quality. And then what you've got at the business end is this little plunger, and you'll notice that it's got two relief slots milled one on either side of center. So very quickly the full diameter of the plunger enters its little hole or its little cylinder. Okay, so obviously that has something to do with forcing oil up the spout. The thing comes apart by means of this this little screw here, and I'm using one of my Grace screwdrivers now. I'm just trying to keep a little bit of tension on the whole thing while I undo the screw so that it doesn't go flying. It's actually a nut. It's like a blind nut. Right. It's all held together by that one little screw. So what we have is these two components kept apart by a spring. So I'll just lose the spring for the moment, hopefully not permanently. That's able to be pumped up and down. So obviously if this tube were filled with oil and you shortened its length, that oil's got to go somewhere. It cannot go out the tail end because that's got a non-return valve. So it must go up this pipe and out of the nose of the oiler. I'll just complete the disassembly. This simply lifts out. and the handle just drops off. There's nothing holding it together except that little brass nut. Then if we look down there, and you won't be able to see in this light, but right in the base of that cylinder, and that's about that deep, there is a little non-return valve. I've got my pair of parallel pliers here, so I'm not going to be damaging this square collar by using a pair of pliers because they close squarely. So I'll just undo that, and I think, was there a spring in here? Yes. Another spring. There's a little bit of swarf or something down there. I don't think that matters. Okay, so that's just a tube. Looking in there, we see a little ball. And so that's a non-return valve for this left-hand straight port. But if you look carefully, you'll see a second port coming up through this angled part of the body there, and that is fed by this main plunger here. And so if we just take that final piece away, so in different angles, this is the way the pump works. When it's upright, or more or less upright, by raising the handle, you pull that pipe together, and the telescoping action of that compresses the oil in that column, squirts it through that little port and out. If you turn the thing upside down, so now we've got oil in the can, in this orientation, with our little periscope high and dry, with no ability to suck oil out and no ability to squirt it where it's needed. And so that's where this little plunger comes into play, because that feeds through that port there, and so that gets pumped up and down. And I will temporarily reassemble it so that you can see how it works. There you go. So from the point at which those slots enter the bore, you then pump that much oil up this straight, say, exhaust or outlet port. And again, there's a little non-return valve, so that whatever left in the brass tube doesn't fall back, so that next time you pump, you only need to give it a squirt or two to get the pressure straight back out again. So very, very cunningly designed, very well thought out, beautifully made, just all falls to pieces, but also kind of falls back together again with, effortlessly. And in my horological work, I find that that is a sign of exceptionally good design, is when a thing goes together really easily. It's a sign that the designer put a lot of thought into it. So just snug that back up. What are we missing? Right, so we're going to put the spring back in to the main cylinder. This plunger is only held in with a little kind of forked arm. I'll keep the pressure on it because we need to assemble the handle, and that goes that way around. Then we put the little, oh yes, that's the one thing I neglected to mention. There's just a straight through path for any remnant oil to drip down, back down into the oil can, so you don't get the outside of the oil can full of oil, over the course of time, which these continental types think of everything. So we reassemble that, just drop that down into the hole, maybe, yes. Let's just get the nut on a couple of threads, a couple of turns there, so I can just take the pressure. I suppose it's still got full pressure actually. Yeah, that would be the better way. Oops, I'm 90 degrees out. Come on, fat fingers. There we go. Back together. And so that's it. Reilang oiler, the oiler that you can use at any angle, doesn't cover everything in oil and muck, and is just a pleasure to use. I would recommend getting one. I mean, these things are about a fiver. This was about, I don't know, 30 euros or something. So really, it's not bad value when you come to think of it. Oh yes, you can also remove, oh, not on this one, but on the others, you know, they do a number of different tips. And so that unscrews, and actually it's got a very tiny jet in this particular one. See the tiny size of that little hole there. And then you've got sideways ports where the oil comes out of. A little O-ring. Nice tight thread, nice fine thread. So really, the Reilang oiler, a fantastic tool.